Chapter 21. The General Crisis of Capitalism. Nature of the General Crisis of Capitalism. General Crisis of Capitalism. A comprehensive crisis of the entire capitalist system, marked by wars, revolutions, and the struggle between declining capitalism and rising socialism. Key characteristics. Two systems. The world splits into capitalist and socialist blocks. Colonial collapse. The colonial system of imperialism disintegrates. Market problems. Chronic underutilization of production capacity and mass unemployment plague capitalist countries. Uneven development and war. Uneven development among capitalist countries leads to imbalances in markets and spheres of influence, causing wars that weaken imperialism and aid the transition to socialism. Prolonged process. The general crisis unfolds over a long historical period, with socialist revolutions occurring at different times in different countries. This leads to the coexistence of capitalist and socialist systems. Two stages. First stage, triggered by World War I and intensified by the Soviet Union's departure from the capitalist system. Second stage, driven by World War II and the emergence of people's democracies in Europe and Asia. The First World War and the beginning of the general crisis of capitalism. Cause. World War I stemmed from intensifying competition between imperialist powers seeking to redivide the world and its resources. Germany, a rising industrial power, challenged the established dominance of Britain and France, leading to a struggle for colonies, markets, and influence. Alliances. Two main blocs emerged: Germany and Austria-Hungary, Britain, France and Russia. Global conflict. The war escalated from a European conflict to a global one, involving countries like Japan and the USA. Devastation. World War I was unprecedented in its scale and destructiveness. Millions of casualties and widespread economic damage. Profiteering monopolies, especially in the USA, reaped enormous profits from war contracts and government spending. Social impact. Increased state control and exploitation of workers. Deepened poverty and social inequality. Fueled revolutionary movements and anti-imperialist sentiment. Consequences. World War I significantly weakened world capitalism and ushered in a new era of instability and revolutionary change. The victory of the Great October Socialist Revolution and the splitting of the world into two systems. Capitalist and socialist Russia. Weakest link. Russia was ripe for revolution due to the convergence of Tsarist autocracy, capitalist exploitation, and colonial oppression. October Revolution. The Bolsheviks, led by Lenin, seized power in 1917, establishing the world's first socialist state. This shattered the imperialist front and inspired revolutionary movements worldwide. Global impact. Splitting the world created a division between capitalist and socialist systems. Weakening imperialism undermined colonial empires and challenged capitalism's global dominance. New era. Ushered in an epoch of proletarian revolutions and national liberation struggles. Socialist versus capitalist systems. The Soviet Union's rapid economic growth contrasted with the instability and crises of the capitalist world, demonstrating the advantages of socialism. Imperialist response. Capitalist powers sought to counter the Soviet Union through economic warfare and the threat of military intervention. Peaceful coexistence. Despite antagonism, the Soviet Union advocated for peaceful coexistence between the two systems. Inspiration for the world. The Soviet Union's success inspired workers and oppressed peoples to fight for their own liberation. Crisis of the colonial system of imperialism. Colonial crisis. A key aspect of capitalism's general crisis is the breakdown of the colonial system. This involves increased exploitation of colonies to offset capitalist difficulties. Growing resistance and national liberation movements in colonies. October Revolution's impact. The Russian Revolution inspired anti-colonial struggles across the globe, particularly in Asia. Industrial development in colonies. Limited industrialization in colonies led to a growing proletariat in those regions. Further conflicts within the capitalist system. Worker exploitation. Colonial workers faced intense exploitation, including poverty wages, debt bondage, and forced labor. Working class leadership. The colonial working class emerged as a leading force in national liberation struggles, forging alliances with the peasantry. Feudal and imperialist oppression. Imperialism maintained feudal structures in the colonies to facilitate exploitation. National bourgeoisie. The colonial national bourgeoisie played a complex role, sometimes participating in anti-imperialist struggles, but often wavering. New stage of liberation. The general crisis created opportunities for colonies to bypass capitalism and transition directly to socialism. Shifting alliances. Colonies increasingly became aligned with the socialist bloc, transforming from reserves of imperialism to reserves of the socialist revolution. Aggravation of the problem of markets. Chronic undercapacity working of enterprises and chronic mass unemployment market problem. A defining feature of capitalism's general crisis is the increasing difficulty in finding markets for goods, leading to chronic underutilization of production capacity. Chronic mass unemployment. Causes. Loss of markets. The removal of socialist countries from the capitalist market system, like the Soviet Union, shrinks available markets and raw material sources. Impoverishment. Exploitation and low wages reduce the purchasing power of the working class, further contracting markets. Colonial competition. Growing native capitalism in colonies creates competition for established capitalist powers. National liberation. Anti-colonial struggles disrupt access to colonial markets. Chronic undercapacity. Factories consistently operate below their potential, even during economic booms. Chronic mass unemployment. Unemployment persists at high levels throughout the economic cycle, creating a massive reserve army of labor. Impact on workers. Increased exploitation and job insecurity. Lower wages and reduced working lives. Impact on peasants. Shrinking urban markets for agricultural goods worsen agrarian crises. Increased competition for scarce jobs in cities. Capitalism's decay. Chronic undercapacity and unemployment demonstrate capitalism's inability to effectively utilize productive forces and meet the needs of society. Sharpened contradictions. The crisis intensifies the fundamental conflict between labor and capital. Deepening of crises of overproduction and changes in the capitalist cycle. Economic crises deepen. The gap between production potential and market capacity leads to more frequent and severe economic crises in the capitalist world. Changes in the business cycle. Shorter cycles. Crises occur more frequently. Greater devastation. Crises have more severe economic and social consequences. Prolonged crisis phase. It takes longer for the economy to recover from a crisis. Unstable booms. Periods of economic growth become shorter and less reliable. Examples. The Great Depression, 1929 to 33, was the deepest crisis in capitalist history, impacting all countries and demonstrating the interconnectedness of the global economy. The 1937 to 38 crisis followed a period of weak recovery, highlighting the limitations of capitalist solutions. Mass unemployment. Crises lead to massive increases in unemployment, exacerbating poverty and social instability. Difficult recovery. Chronic undercapacity and low consumer demand hinder economic recovery. Agrarian crises. Agricultural overproduction and falling prices worsen the plight of farmers. War and militarization. While war spending can temporarily stimulate the economy, it ultimately leads to greater instability and deeper crises. Declining growth. The overall rate of economic growth in the capitalist world slows down. State monopoly capitalism and fascism. To maintain control, the ruling class intensifies state intervention in the economy and, in some cases, resorts to fascist dictatorships. Road to war. The inability to resolve internal contradictions pushes capitalist powers towards preparations for another world war to redivide global resources and markets.